Hello. Hi. I'm not sure if you can hear me or no, but it seems that like my timer has started. So, how you doing, first of all? The resolution here, what are we going to talk about? The resolution says that after death, there must be some form of life or consciousness. Okay. Since I'm going to be taking the pro side in this resolution, there are different schools of thought which approve of the notion that you will not simply vanish from the pages of existence just because your physical body died. Um, I guess I will be providing philosophical, theological, and scientific evidence to back up my claim. Let's start with the theological evidence. First of all, Buddhism, it is a religion, okay? You might call it a philosophy if you wish, but it is the fact that it's followed by more than 300 million people around the world. In the teaching of the Buddha, we exist within a stream of existence. And all of us will pass away eventually as part of the natural process of birth, aging, and death. To Buddhism, however, death is not the end of life. It is merely the end of the body we inhabit in this life, but our spirit or consciousness, if you wish to call it, will still remain and seek out through the need of attachment or attachment to a new body or a new life. So we can say that in Buddhism, life does not end. It merely goes on in other forms. And let me remind you again that this is the reality for more than 300 million people. Similarly, by more than 1 billion people across the world believes in reincarnation. Death for the Hindu is merely a transition. It is simultaneously an end and a new beginning. Moreover, the religion of Islam, which is followed by more than 1.8 billion people, and that's like 25% of the world's population. The common belief there is that after death, the soul or consciousness will survive and be judged in the judgment day. And very similar beliefs about life after death and resurrection are held by the Judeo-Christian population, which consists of more than 2.3 billion followers. With that being said, the statistics reveal that at least 80% of
Okay. So I think it's my turn right here. Thank you very much, and I hear your points. So I have a few things to counteract it. The first thing I would like to say is your appeal to Buddhism and Islam being believed by many people, right? So that's argumentum ad populum, right? So an argument to the people, which is a formal fallacy that includes the proposition is true because many or most people believe it, which is inherently fallacious thinking only because there are so many things that many people believe that absolutely aren't true, which is why when we're discussing propositions like these, it's important to understand the nature of evidence or reasoning, or even if not absolute concrete proof, some kind of logical proof that would get us to that place. As far as the resolution itself go, I'd like to go with a couple of definitions because we didn't touch on them in your first speech. First, I'd like to focus on the word must. Merriam-Webster defines must as being a few things, but I'm going to go with its very first definition. So, to be under the necessity to, or to be obliged or bound. Now, not obliged or bound, but to be under the necessity to, meaning it must be necessary to believe that there must be some form of life or consciousness, which means it just must be. Like, there can't be really any doubt about it, which I think is in a lot of jeopardy when you're presenting your arguments purely through argumentum ad populum. The other thing is consciousness, the state of being conscious, aware of one's own existence, sensations, thoughts, surroundings. And I don't think that that's being proven by your points either. And as much as I respect the argument from faith, these religions, tribalism, all of it, whether it's Islam, Christianity, Judaism, all the monotheistic, polytheistic religions even, a lot of these have such complex evolutions from a cognitive linguistics or cognitive psychology perspective or evolutionary anthropology perspective that they're not providing evidence as to why those things must be so, rather than hoping that they are so or arguing they are so from texts and sources that obviously have their credibility in question. So I am going to counter propose that if there is consciousness after death, it could only be proven from a neuroscientific perspective, and that's that 2 to 3 minutes where sometimes we can be fairly cognizant after we die. But even if you present that argument, I have counters to that as well.
Okay, all right. Uh, when I first proposed in this debate, I said that I will be discussing this debate from a different perspective. I will discuss the theological part of it, the scientific part of it, and the philosophical part of it. Now, what I've discussed is the religious part of it, or the theological part of it. With that being said, the statistics reveal that at least 80% of the entire population on Earth believe in a way or another that after death, there must be some form of life or consciousness. And the matter of fact is that your belief is what shapes your reality. If you believe it to be true, then it is true for you. This is what the law of attraction suggests. And this is the first law of universal truth. You are the creator of your own reality. I mean, this is a basic fact that we can't deny. What is true for you is what is real for you. If you want a demonstration of that on real life basis, one of the most sophisticated examples that belief creates and shapes the reality is the contemporary paper money. I know this is a completely different debate, but this is just for the sake of examples. The value of money isn't inherent, but it comes from the belief that it has value. At the end of the day, it's just a piece of paper that is not backed up by gold or silver or any precious metals. It has no intrinsic value outside of what we as species and society put upon it. So the belief that this piece of paper has purchasing power give it its value. But that is a whole different debate. I agree with that. And I know another strong argument that proves the belief creates the reality is the placebo effect. This psychological phenomenon in which the recipient received an improvement in condition due to personal expectation rather than the treatment itself is because of the belief. And I'll pass the mic for you to discuss that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So I guess we're going to focus on this kind of majority belief argument that because so many people hold beliefs that consciousness after life must be true or must be true for them, that we're going to focus on that as kind of the crux of your argument, and that's kind of the foundation upon it seems which most of your arguments are going to lay on, which is fine. We can go in on that, but that's going to require that I get a little boring with regards to why fallacious arguments of that nature don't necessitate a good argument, and why it's that kind of reasoning is actually bad. It's a bad foundation of epistemology to move humanity forward, right? So this argumentum ad populum, also called vox populi, the reason it's wrong is because this fallacy is generally committed in order to convince others to just hop on a bandwagon when there's no evidence to the contrary. And this has caused so many problems in the history of thought for humankind. We can see it right now when just the notion of, and you touched on this as well when you said, well, your belief shapes your reality. It's a reality for you, so it must be true. Except no, right? Like there are objective realities and there are objective metrics of empirical evidence or even analysis and induction that can allow us to create a reality that is independent from such. Otherwise, for the schizophrenic, anything could be true. For 47% of Trump supporters in the United States, everything he says could absolutely be true because whatever, it's just violence on all sides. But that's not how things work. That's how we've gotten to a post-fact era. That's how we've gotten to alternative facts, fake news, misinformation, misleading media, misleading politicians. this whole, not only is argument from popularity a red herring, it's also just a genetic fallacy. It's a fallacy of irrelevance. The conclusion is suggested solely based on something's history, origin, or source rather than its current meaning or context. Now, you mentioned money. It's a great example. The only reason money gives us any meaning is because we need it for some level of sustenance. And it's not just because we agreed upon, well, sure, whatever, I guess it works. There is a history of commerce, like Marx does this whole genealogy of capital and commerce and how it's gotten to the paper dollar in Capital. There's a reasoning for it. There was a logical, inductive process that allowed money to be a form of currency. The analogy to your argument that a lot of people believe it, so hey, there it is, would be if a million people, as a means of social control or evolutionary anthropology, just started thinking that monopoly money was money. And even then, that doesn't have an implication on our current lives now. That implication is part of our the necessity of living, whereas this is an ethereal question that doesn't.
Well, okay, let me go with this. I think you're not buying into the religious argument. So let's take a different perspective, because I said I will be approaching this topic from different perspectives. The idea of life after death is also supported scientifically, and I can provide proof for that. It all comes to the basic understanding of what life is. Every living thing on this planet is made of cells. Your physical existence is composed of trillions of cells and trillions of bacteria. Basically, a cell is a protein-based robot that has the replicating capability that allows it to transform into functioning organs, which ultimately make you and me. Eventually, every living thing will die. The goal of the whole process is to prevent this from happening by introducing new entities. And by this, I mean a very elegant, sophisticated instruction code, pretty much that by this, I mean the DNA, the information which sustains life. So life is, in a way, just a lot of stuff that carries genetic information around. Therefore, basically, life is information that managed to ensure its continuous existence. So the image of ourselves as a static thing is far from the truth. Every single second, and are replaced by others. Every time all of your cells die and are replaced, you are slightly different. And this is how we experience growth. This is how we experience age, which means that a part of you is dying constantly, but you still get to experience life after that constant death of parts of you. And eventually, when you cease to function as the individual human colony that you are, and I am as well, and after you are buried, the cells and bacteria in your body will migrate to turn into a plant or some other form of life. And this notion is very compatible with the law of conservation of energy, which states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It just transforms from one form to another. So I'll pass the mic for you to suggest a different alternative for that.
So that's good. We're kind of transitioning here. So I'll cover a couple of things you said. On the first hand, I want to go back to the definition of must, where it to be under the necessity to. So we're saying that there must be some form of life or consciousness after death. The second you touched on is consciousness, where you live on in some kind of very light ethereal form. Now, I want to go back to my Merriam-Webster definition, and that is not just you exist. It's not just kind of laying there in a blob-like form. Consciousness is the state of being conscious, which is awareness of one's own existence, sensations, thoughts, and surroundings. That is significantly different from kind of just laying there, right? And also, if we're going to use life or biology as the metric for like, well, you become a plant, I understand that, but I think that leads to a lot of slippery slopes, which could kind of analogize us as, our ancestors are single-celled amoebas, and I don't think that's true, right? I don't think anyone's really going to buy the fact that some form of life means your molecules decompose into the plant that allows for flowers to give us air to breathe. I don't think that's where we're going with this. So let's focus on, do you and your consciousness, your own individual existence, can it exist after death? And I think that's definitively a no, right? So I think Giulio Giulio Tononi and Stephen Loris wrote a book called The Neurology of Consciousness, Cognitive Neuroscience and Neuropathology. And in this chapter 8, they have an entire chapter on consciousness and brain death. Now, brain and life death are a little bit different, right? Because on the one hand, you can have so death in the neuropsychological, in the neurobiological sense, is brain death or biological death, which is to define a person as being dead. The brain death has to be defined as the complete and irreversible loss of brain function, meaning involuntary activity necessary to sustain life, your breathing, your blood circulation. That's not like cardiac arrest and then someone comes back from the dead and they were like, oh, I saw a light. That's not that. So in that context, I don't think that there must be some form of life or consciousness. To the contrary, I think the overwhelming evidence of neuroscience and the entire field of cognitive processes shows that once that shuts down, our identity of consciousness and the life that employs the biology of our bodies ceases to exist. That's electrical and magnetic stimulations, that's optogenetic sensations. Anything that makes you, anything that makes me, is gone once those functions cease to exist. And I think that's kind of the crux of my argument here. And so that's the burden of rejoinder on me. So I'm looking for the burden of proof on you to show why that.
Okay. Now I'll try to approach this resolution using some philosophical and scientific argument. Let's just remember one more time that the resolution here says that what does it say again? It says that after death, there must be some form of life or consciousness, okay? I think it's very clear here. Must be some form of life or consciousness. And when we put this into perspective, we can make sure that, you know, it depends on the interpretation of how you perceive the resolution. Let me ask you this question. Is it possible that we are much more part of the universe around us than we thought? Let me break it down to you. Carl Sagan said that the nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies were made in the interior collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff. We are made of stardust. Nikola Tesla, the brilliant scientist who was ages ahead of his time, said that if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, vibration, and frequency. Einstein told us that matter and energy are two sides of the same coin. And if you know what the recent discoveries of particle physics are, it just reveals that matter, which is the building blocks of you and me and everything around us, is made of pure energy. So this scientific fact destroys the notion that the material world is all that there is. There is much more than the material world around us. With that being said, this supports the claim of the universal mind that goes beyond many names. In the scientific world, we call it the unified field theory. In spiritual philosophy, we refer to that as the all, or the universal consciousness. And in religion, we call that God. This suggests, if this is true, then that our consciousness does not just vanish in an eternal void after we die. And let me ask you one more philosophical question. So, is life and death an irrelevant question? You know, another way to perceive things, or another way to look at things, is by asking, are you only your physical body? If so, how much of yourself can you remove before you still be you? If you donate an organ, for instance, this means that a part of you became a part of someone else. If you die, but that organ, which is technically still a part of you, survived in a different body, this means that a part of you is alive even after you die. So I think this matches very well with the resolution.
Okay, so I understand where you're coming from, and so you made a lot of if-then statements there. It seems like we're going back to the first kind of round of argumentation, except now I understand you're not appealing to the fact that a lot of people believe it, but just appealing kind of to the notion that there could be, not must be, that there could be some universal consciousness, a God, a collective understanding, a collective soul. And I understand that. My argument would be no, there doesn't need to be, right? There could be, maybe there is. There are ethereal notions of the universe and of existence that we don't have knowledge of, that we may never have full knowledge of, and that they're a bit beyond the grasp of our existence, like many things, right? The quantum mechanics were outside the grasp of our existence just some time ago. The sun being the center of the universe was outside our grasp some time ago. As the history of human thought has moved forward, as our capacity to understand our world has expanded, we've been able to shore up some of the uncertainties that exist in the world. This is one of those uncertainties to which we can only apply some measure of empirical analysis or evidentiary-based thought. Now, there have been a lot of philosophers from St. Thomas Aquinas to Rene Descartes to argue logical proofs for the existence of God, but none of those have been made here. It's just we've kind of just been presented on the pro side with kind of this ephemeral, but if there is, right, if there's some collective consciousness, if there is a God, then your body doesn't die with you, your consciousness doesn't die with you. Yes, but if I wasn't sitting on a chair, I'd fall. But I am. If, right? This is, again, I'm waiting for some kind of reasoning or logical proof that necessitates me to accept that if as a premise to a greater conclusion. Whereas, again, you're presenting the conclusion as the premise itself. And my counterbalance to that would be simply that I don't think that there is any evidence to prove in any of the cognitive fields, in neuroscience, or even in philosophy that necessitate the notion that there must be some form of life and consciousness. And I'll go back to this slippery slope argument when you mentioned Carl Sagan, that nitrogen and primordial ooze and single-celled amoebas and the interplay of those throughout kind of the web of time don't necessitate one string of life from one to the other. I don't think anyone could reasonably make that argument that that is the life or consciousness of the self as defined by the first speech.
Well, let me break it down to you one more time. It's just a matter of perception on what we perceive as true, on what we perceive as real or not. Some of the things out there could not be tested in a laboratory, but they're true nonetheless. I'll give you a very familiar example to make the notion more comprehensible. One of the most surprising discoveries of the 20th century was that the visible universe, including Earth and the stars and galaxies and anything made of ordinary matter, make up less than 5% of the actual mass of the universe. The rest of the universe appears to be made of a hypothetical and visible substance called dark matter, which makes up to almost 25% of the mass of the universe, and a mysterious force which repels gravity called dark energy, and that makes a staggering 75% of the actual mass of the universe. This means that our current scientific understanding of the universe is that 95% of it is undetectable and immeasurable. With that being said, it is more convenient for many to accept very bizarre and strange hypothetical theories. I'm not sure if you're one of them, such as black holes, multiverses, or Big Bang theory, or the Big Crunch theory, or the simulation hypothesis, or that we are a product of a simulation, for digital simulation, than to accept the very strong indicator that there is a higher form of consciousness and that there is a superior intelligence out there, and simply after our physical body dies, there can't be life after this because we can't simply measure that in a laboratory. This is not something that you will find under the most powerful microscope or through the most sophisticated telescope. This is something that you will have to figure out through a lot of logic, a lot of reason, and a lot of faith. I'll pass the mic to you.
Yeah. So I think all the arguments that you just made are correct, but serve my argument as opposed to yours, only because that's actually the history of thought that I was trying to outline to you, right? So you're right. Dark energy and dark matter are what spurred quantum physics and string theory as an entire field of science. The thing is, there were ways to detect those things, right? So, for example, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Sweden is trying to combine neutrinos at top speed to understand if we can get something like the God particle, if we can create a matter of dark energy between two atoms, if we simulate the conditions of the Big Bang of the Big Bang, for example. These things are, or with black holes, we can analyze them with not analyze them obviously, but we can see them with large measure spectrometers or telescopes and understand where they exist and how. We know how black holes happen, right? A supernova collapses, and the gravitational weight of the density of that star makes it such that it can't exist in a vacuum of space. So that the vacuum of space opens up into an intense gravitational pull. Those are things we can see, and it's just our turn to analyze it. That doesn't mean that we'll figure it out, but it is there. They're objectively there, and we can see them and look at them. That is much for you to say, because there is dark matter, dark energy, and black holes. Well, there must be some form of ethereal, higher power, God consciousness that exists outside our death, something that is absolutely not verifiable. It is not identifiable. We can't see it. We can't feel it. No one can speak to it. There is nothing to analyze that can allow us to even understand, to rest it on some level of foundation of certainty. Even the most basic of philosophical precepts, even ethereal ones, must begin from a true statement. That's how Rene Descartes got to "I think, therefore I am." He thought there was an evil demon inside his head, and who was convincing him that the reality around him was something that it wasn't. He was a solipsist, so he had to break down knowledge and certainty to its very rarest, barest essence, which is, well, I am thinking these thoughts, therefore I must exist. We haven't even gotten to the foundation of certainty that it can allow us to build the argument that there is a higher consciousness, such as to necessitate the fact that there must be some form of life or consciousness afterwards. But it looks like our half an hour is up, but in case it isn't, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed this debate, and it was really nice talking with you. If we can go on for a bit, I would be more than happy to, but otherwise, I cede my time to you, and thank you very much.
I again emphasize on the notion that we have a misconception or misunderstanding of how the resolution works, because it says that there must be some form of life or consciousness. I provided a definite proof that there could be some form of life or consciousness, because the resolution states some form of life, and some form of life, you know, after you die, you just transform into some form of life. And I'll just need to add one more thing. One of the most agreed upon theories in this scientific realm concerning the beginning of the universe, or how it all started, is the Big Bang theory. This is the most widely accepted notion of how everything came into existence. It simply states that at one particular point, there was a singular start to everything that exists. The beginning of the universe, the existence of time, the start of space, and even the initial foundation of time itself all burst into existence in an enormous explosion of energy and light. You know, the seed of everything that ever happened in the universe was planted in that first instant. Now, when you think about that, who caused it? What caused it? Did it just, pop into existence out of nowhere? And, for us to rule, a superior intelligence or God out of the equation because we cannot detect that in a laboratory, I think is a logical fallacy. If you need to apply logic here, it is more convenient that this process happened because someone triggered it to happen. And this notion supports the